Welcome to Leadership Under the Microscope, a production of JR Global. Our current series is Leading in Crisis and focuses on how leaders react to and perform in time of turmoil. The emphasis today is on the arts and education sector. Here is your host, J.R. Klein.
Thinking about educational value of fine arts is changing with innovations like SHAPE, which stands for Social Science, Humanities, and the Art of People and the Economy. This new nomenclature enables the clear articulation of the value of these subject areas and recognizes the contributions they make alongside STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and math, in helping to understand the world and find solutions to global issues. As with any of the arts, a song is more than a collection of sharps and flats and chords. It can be a gateway to joy, empathy, and most importantly, during tumultuous times like these, the empowerment of the essential connection that comes with sharing the art experience. Even a brief examination of history exposes the direct connection between creative thinking and art. Unfortunately, COVID-19 induced school closures have placed the future of art education and its subsequent empowerment in a precarious position. Arts and design schools and universities of fine arts, their programs, during the age of this pandemic have had to shutter or develop alternative methods of teaching students. Although there has not been a one-size-fits-all solution, various forms of complete and partial remote learning have been in effect for more than a year. As the pandemic ends, educators will have to decide how to evaluate their effectiveness and how to integrate at least some of these new approaches with the old. Kenneth Boulton is a Grammy-nominated pianist whose performances and recordings have garnered international acclaim. As a seasoned performer, Dr. Boulton has presented solo and chamber music recitals in many major U.S. cities, including New York City, Philadelphia, and Washington, D.C. His international appearances have included performances at the Moscow Conservatory, Rachmaninoff Hall, and Oxford University. He earned his baccalaureate degree in piano from Washington State University and his master's and doctoral degree in piano performance with University of Maryland at College Park. He was a professor of piano at Southeast Louisiana University, where he also served as the head of the Department of Fine and Performing Arts. Dr. Boulton currently serves as Dean of the School of Fine Arts at Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Today we have with us Dr. Kenneth Boulton, who is the Dean of the School of Fine Arts at Northern State University in Aberdeen, South Dakota. Welcome, Dr. Boulton.
Hello, JR.
We're happy to have you here and very excited about having some discussions about your leading in this current crisis that we are no longer hopefully in the midst of, but are still feeling the ramifications of.
Definitely.
As we heard in the opening, there are some big changes that are happening in the arts and in education. And as we start our conversation here, tell us a little bit about your story. How did you get to the position that you're in today? Maybe something about your thinking and philosophy as a leader in arts education.
Of course, JR. Well, you might say that my position here, my life here in rural South Dakota is the culmination of many miles traveled and basically saying yes to many potentially new opportunities along the way. As the bio probably clarified a little bit, I am a native of the Pacific Northwest. I was born in Seattle, but spent the majority of my formative years in a small town about an hour north of Seattle. I went to undergraduate school on the other side of the state, Washington State University. But upon graduating from that fine institution, I took a chance and went back east to the University of Maryland, where I studied with a wonderful teacher, Dr. Nolita True. I would have gone wherever she was. In this case, it happened to be at the University of Maryland, which was right outside of Washington, D.C. I knew no one in College Park, Maryland, except that this was the place where I felt I needed to be to begin my graduate studies. And because of that, while I was there, I met my wife, Joanne Barry, who I married while I was still there. And subsequently, we moved to Philadelphia, where she spent 14 wonderful years as the archivist of the Philadelphia Orchestra and Academy of Music, and also during which time I taught for almost 8 years at the Music School of Delaware in Wilmington, Delaware, about 30 miles down Interstate 95. It was there that I not only had really tremendous teaching experience as a piano teacher. I'm a pianist by training, and interacted with many wonderful colleagues, but I also got my first taste of administration as the chairperson of the piano department. At some point during the early part of the 2000s, I began looking for an opportunity in higher education. The Music School of Delaware was a very large community music school, but I wanted a taste of higher education, which of course I was fully qualified to do since I had just achieved the doctorate. And in higher ed, you basically go where the jobs are, if you can. If you have any hope of advancing in that field. So the school that happened to call was Southeastern Louisiana University in Hammond, Louisiana. I began there in 2003 as an assistant professor of piano, but also as the director of the Southeastern Community Music School. So I was half that and half faculty. Well, after about 5 or 6 years advancing through the academic ranks there and building the community music school there, my mentor, who was department head at the time, retired. Just at the point at which a lot of academic departments at Southeastern were consolidating. And in my case, the Department of Music and Dramatic Arts, which was basically music, dance, and theater, became the Department of Fine and Performing Arts, which encompassed art and design with all the other music and performing arts. So I didn't know exactly how that was going to last, how that was going to progress, but I ended up feeling like it was my calling. Again, being open to new opportunities, you never know where this or that decision to say yes will lead, but I really felt it was my calling, and I loved the ability to do things that seemed to match my own personal temperament. I'm someone who enjoys working with people. I enjoy acquiring knowledge from new colleagues. I enjoy planning new proposals. I love fundraising and interacting with the community. And mostly, I enjoy celebrating the success of others. And so my 4 years as department head at this sprawling arts department really prepared me for the next, and as it turns out, probably the last advancement in my career as an arts administrator, and that is where I am right now, as a leader of a really dynamic, cohesive arts school, which encompasses the fields of music, art, and theater. So that's how I got to where I am. I fully expect, now I've been here since 2016. I fully anticipate being here until I retire, And Joanne and I will at that point probably return to our life on the East Coast, where we really had 14 or 15 really fulfilling, wonderful years.
Fascinating story. And it really shows you how perseverance and paying attention can actually move you through this world, not just in academics, but in business and leadership as well.
Yeah, I quite agree. I mean, if you look at my resume, my education lists 3 degrees, bachelor's, master's, and doctorate, and they were all in piano performance. Nothing about arts administration, nothing about higher ed administration. So it's something that we need to counsel students on. Your degree is only a launching pad. It bears no resemblance, or it may bear no resemblance to what you end up doing 10 years hence or more, And what you end up doing that really ends up being satisfying is, as I said, more a result of your natural temperament and personality than it is your degrees.
Isn't that right? That building of the character of leadership has so much to do, whether you become a recognized leader or not.
Yeah, true.
Character always has its positive influence. Now, you were fortunate enough to be a leader inside of this arts education community when this unplanned and unexpected event called the pandemic showed itself to us. It came at us quickly with a little warning. What were some of your initial reactions when you got first exposed to this crisis?
Yeah. Well, I was not alone. It was a shot out of left field. We were making things up on the fly, as was the case around all over the world. Things pretty much stopped functioning in their normal ways in March of 2020. There was a sudden shutdown of all in-person instruction, and we had to pivot immediately to and transition into online classes and lessons. So our short-term goal was to get ourselves to the end successfully of that particular spring semester, to bring it in for a successful landing, and to also make sure that each individual student was in a good place, because some of them were many of them were having to uproot themselves without any sort of advanced planning to return home, wherever home was, or a transitionary spot if it wasn't on campus. And so there were just a lot of individual cases that we had to manage, navigate, and do repeated kind of mental check-ins for. So, and our faculty themselves also had to transition into a realm of course delivery that some of them were unaccustomed to, meaning online instruction. Fortunately, many of our faculty have done online instruction, either 100% or partially, previous to this, and so it was a natural kind of function for them. But we have faculty, and I guess if I were still faculty, I would classify myself as one of the old schools, one of the old school people. And so they had to receive some training and some counseling from university staff, from their own music and art colleagues, to sort of get them up to speed quickly and efficiently, so that, again, they did not lose the connection with the curriculum, with the progression of the class structure, and ultimately for the end of classes. And so we did that fine, because we had to. But then the real work started when we realized that this was not going to go away over the course of the warm months of last summer. And we actually did have to have a game plan in place so that the students and faculty, when and if we did return in the fall, could do so with some reliable element of safety. and plan for success. So that was our longer term goal. That was my longer term goal, keeping the faculty calm and engaged in the planning process, because I personally felt very unsettled. I mean, the pandemic at that point was hitting different parts of the country in different ways. The state responses were vastly different. We all know that. And to make matters even worse for me, for our realm of the industry, musical activities seemed to present the highest level of risk in terms of the aerosol spread. Now, one thing that kind of helped us in the long run was that the South Dakota Board of Regents, early on, I think this may have been in May, sometime in late May, they published an official statement of their commitment and goal to return in the fall for in-person instruction. We knew that a lot of states, a lot of our sister institutions around the country, especially on the two coasts, had already at that point committed to virtual instruction. And yet we're being told here that our goal is quite the opposite. That was okay. Once we kind of wrapped our brains around that, we could at least have a goal to plan for. And so then the real work started in terms of how we were going to reconcile this goal of returning to school in August, balanced with safety and so forth. And I think that's going to be the topic of your next question. So
yeah, really, yeah, you really started to pay attention. And I heard a couple of things that are encouraging, and they are emblematic of leadership thinking, basically. One is that your action was immediate. You know, as soon as you began to understand what the problem was, you began to immediately take some actions to build solutions. And it's also interesting to me that you talk about another piece of that, and that that kind of thinking, that kind of immediate action was inclusive. It wasn't just a bunch of deans and the president sitting around in some office. It included individual students, it included administration, it included faculty. That idea of engagement becomes very, very interesting. And so you were facing a lot of these kind of challenges, these kind of macro challenges of managing sort of, I would call it the relevance and the presence of the school, you know, and then began to think through and sort of dig through this idea, this complexity of those details like pedagogy and access, matriculation, resource management, along with the students and faculty interaction. So I guess what I'm interested in is really hearing about a little bit about what your thought processes were based upon this idea of you kind of had these challenges unfolding every day. It wasn't like you had something happen that you had to react to it, but they were unfolding every day. What was your thinking and strategies to stay relevant?
Well, you're right. This was a holistic kind of planning process, and it certainly involved the entire camp. We were not alone, although the challenges that the arts posed were more acute and more critical, and we needed to be more sensitive and cognizant of those. Having this as a task, a robust task throughout last summer, although it was stressful for the faculty, I think in the long run, it provided an outlet for them to stay focused, stay engaged, during a time when they really couldn't travel anywhere. There were no vacations being taken to any degree. So this was something that was able to occupy my faculty's time in a really, really important way. And we also realized that we were not alone. This was not unique to Northern or South Dakota. This was happening all over the country. And there were several really important sites of research going on One was at the University of Colorado, Boulder. The other was the University of Maryland, my alma mater, and Peabody. And certain of my faculty had connections, personal connections, at each of those schools. And so, along with doing their own research, they were able to tap into these two hugely constructive research things going on at big universities. And what we would do is do our own research as a faculty and then come back every 2 weeks, basically, and have a Zoom meeting and report and share ideas about what some of the concerns were, how they were evolving, recommendations, data, statistics, measurements. And as the summer went on, we slowly but surely came to some definite conclusions about what would work with us, knowing that, again, we had the goal of expecting the students would be back, that faculty would be back. So that was the goal. What were some elements of technology? What were some strategies that we could acquire that would assist us in this goal? And we came up with 5 or 6 really clear things that we implemented right from the get-go, and they lasted us all the way through the year, and they got us to the end of the year in a really successful way. One was, of course, masking. Masks ended up being required, mandated, as per the Board of Regents, for all inside buildings on camp. But regular masks were not really practical for certain musical activities, because we wanted to make sure that our students were masked up, not only being around each other in social situations, but also while they were either singing or playing their instruments. And so we did, again, our faculty did research on and made some recommendations on some special masks that were being developed for singers and wind players and brass players. And we were able to use some special COVID funds that were opened up to us through the university to acquire these necessary but frankly very expensive items. So that was one important thing. 2 was establishing physical distance in rehearsals, moving out of the traditional choir room rehearsal space and the band room rehearsal space, and opening up our larger Jewett Theater stage for every single rehearsal, not just dress rehearsals and concerts, but weekly rehearsals throughout the year. This enabled us to diagram out on the stage how physically separated certain students needed to be depending on what they played. 3 was, of course, cleaning. And we have a really superb unit of 3 custodians who have been with us for several years. And they were definitely part of the solution here of deep cleaning certain high-use areas of the building more regularly, more consistently than they would have normally. They also, each and every evening, would run a load of special towels that we purchased that over the course of each day, the brass and wind players would use to catch all the condensation coming out of instruments. And they would run these towels through the washer and dryer and put them out the next morning for us to repeat the whole process again. So this kept the facility cleaner. 4 was ventilation. And again, this came as part of that research, that ventilated areas are safer than closed-in, high-use, non-ventilated areas. And so we had the students partner with us to manage such spaces as our practice rooms. We set a 30-minute cap for practice sessions. Students had to sign in and sign out, and between and among the scheduled practice sessions, the doors would be left open to air out the rooms. And we basically applied this same principle to all of our high-use rehearsal spaces. 5 was, of course, technology. Now, other schools here on campus made much more use of hybrid or high-flex online virtual teaching. compared to those of us in the arts, but there were faculty in the School of Fine Arts that did avail themselves of the high flex mode. Lectures were recorded and made available for students if they had to miss classes for one reason or another. And so there was just a much more kind of flexible arrangement that students could take advantage of if they had to miss for a week or two. And lastly, we shifted our classes to larger spaces, all of our classes, not just rehearsals of our larger ensembles. And this had to be done in coordination with the other deans because we had suddenly our traditional spaces over in the Johnson Fine Arts Center being used by geography or sociology or history or English. And that's okay. We were able to make it all work. Probably the most important thing we did after we had sort of a game plan that was evolving over the course of 2.5 months over the course of last summer. Once we had things in place, once we had a plan that we thought could work, we got in touch with our students, returning and new, in advance of their returning to campus, letting them know exactly what we were going to be doing, what they could expect, what they were going to be responsible for. Because this could not work unless they were partners, unless they collaborated with us, unless they were fellow leaders, not just in the arts, but for the campus. And indeed, as the year went through, as the year went on, when we finally realized that this could work, the entire campus really looked to us for setting the gold standard of how to navigate through COVID and still provide the students with a supportive and fulfilling artistic experience, educational and academic experience.
That's very interesting. You know, I hear in your narrative, in your conversation, some very salient points that leaders, not just in crisis, but other in just sort of day-to-day business, this idea of spending time to identify the resources that you have available. And that's just not the resources that you have in-house, but other resources, other areas that may be working on the same kinds of issues that you are, to sort of get in touch with what I would probably call this common wisdom, which you were able to do. The other thing, there's two other things in that I heard that I think are very important to reiterate. One is the level of communication. You started out that level of communication with the faculty, and it was an ongoing level. Yes. But then at some point, you actually began to bring students in. And I have to just infer for that, it's just not faculty, it was staff also. If you have your maintenance or sanitation staff that are going to the lengths that they would go to in the program that you're describing, they had to have a level of engagement in this too. I like the idea of the asymmetric approach that you took. Not symmetrical. There wasn't one answer to the question. The answer to the question was there are a number of answers. A number of solutions for the question, and then finally another great point that I heard was the adoption of common wisdom. You had your Board of Regents saying one thing, and you had a whole bunch of other voices saying a bunch of other things. Mm-hmm. You were somewhat within the bureaucracy trap. That you better do that. But the reality was it was the wise thing to do. This whole idea about bringing together pragmatic solutions to the problem or for a problem is very, very interesting. And then one last thing I'll just throw in as I move out of it. I like the way that your thinking brought you to valuing a lot of different voices.
Mhm.
Instead of just those leaders, those faculty that had the important voices, you listen to a lot of other voices and put value to them as you put them in there. This was sort of an overwhelming kind of a crisis for everybody. We were almost on a daily basis meeting a number of unknown issues that nobody knew the answers to, and a whole bunch of complexity that was confusing.
Well, as thorough and as transparent and as organic as our planning was, there was no guarantee that this was going to succeed. And that was sort of an underlying anxiety that we all felt individually and collectively. This could have gone south really, really quickly. I know that I know for a fact that there were wagers among the faculty. How many weeks would it be before we shut down?
Yeah, well, I'm going to coin a new phrase: anxiety is the mother of invention. And so tell me a little bit about when that happened. That one solution that you started didn't always work. What was your thinking? How did you handle those kinds of things when you needed to adjust?
Right. Well, as it turned out, JR, I think everything we did turned out to work when taken in combination. Everything worked. I can't think of anything that we would have done differently, and maybe we just got a little lucky. But I'd like to think otherwise. It was more by design. What really was what we didn't know. Well, once we were back and engaged, and maybe we're a couple of weeks into the semester, there were still a number of things that we really hadn't wrapped our collective brains around. And it had to do with how were we going to, okay, so our students and faculty are back and so far things going well, but how were we going to interface and stay connected with our vast network of high schools and prospective students? Because recruiting never stops, and particularly music faculty have a traditional, they are traditionally wired to face-to-face recruiting, hosting high school students for various clinics and festivals and camps, or going out to schools and immersing themselves into their programs, as a adjudicator, a clinician, taking our ensembles to networks of high schools for concert performances. That was not going to happen this past year. We knew that. So we had to, and we started having these discussions immediately, but the firm planning really didn't start until 2 or 3 weeks into the fall semester last year. We had to completely reimagine our traditional modes of recruiting. And that was profoundly worrisome to me and to a lot of our academic leaders. So what we did was, again, I got the leaders from music, theater, and art, together with our admissions people, together with our technology people on campus, and our marketing people, and we started having some weekly discussions on what could take the place. How could we get our message out? How could we maintain our presence? How could we stay in the consciousness and awareness of our network of prospective students and their high school directors? And so what we ended up doing was turning to technology again. We combined, and this is another advantage of being a dean of a comprehensive, dynamic program, but one that is not terribly large. We are we are extremely nimble when need be. And so we formulated an idea for a virtual arts day where all of our units, theater, art, and music, presented and prepared a variety of both pre-recorded and live Zoom sessions that we broadcasted out to a large list of high schools and individual students on a particular day in early November. This took the place of the band day. It took the place of instrument day, of high school art day, of the choral leadership workshop day, of the orchestra day, all-state orchestra day. And it got every single faculty involved, every single staff person involved, because they all prepared either solo or collaborative Zoom sessions. And we had tours of our building and of the campus. We had chat sessions with our student leaders. We spent the entire day with interacting with these students and their schools, but online. And so the students could also visit certain Zoom meetings, which changed every 30 minutes. They could hop around depending on their interests. It was very flexible, and I just could not have been more proud of the effort that we put forward. And we were also able to track student information that came through the registration process and follow up with our admissions office. That was a really big push, and it took the better part of 2 months to prepare. But everyone really felt good about it. We were also able to pivot and do our annual Young Artist Competition. We made that into a online event, completely online. And even many of our scholarship auditions this past February were online video submissions. So these and it ended up that our recruiting year has been very, very successful. We have a net gain all over what we've brought in the last couple of years, in a year where we had no clue what to expect. But it has taken more work tracking these students individually than it has in the past.
Yeah, that's a very good place to kind of get into this next question. This really is interesting, this idea about connecting to community and sort of the idea of unlearning and relearning. And I love your characterization as rethinking of what you were doing. This sort of visual arts day is really just brilliant at sort of innovative solutions, which we're starting to think about here also as this crisis, this pandemic is changing now. We're kind of, knock on wood, we're moving out of it maybe, or moving out of the real critical stage of it. You started to talk about this, and I want you to expand some thoughts on how this is going to kind of change the way you do business. Because you came up with some very, very interesting, innovative things that seem to me to have relevance not only inside the crisis.
Oh yeah. Well, I think we're having to be increasingly more mindful of our own physical and mental health, and that of our students. Pursuing a degree in the arts, especially music, is fraught with mental health issues because of the vast amount of time and that it takes, the ease of being overcommitted because you want to do it all, and our better students do it all, even though some of them shouldn't. So, the faculty has over the past couple of years, but I think it's really ramped up this past year, has begun to have a transparent, more honest discussion of the traditional demands that we put on students. We are in the process of, to whatever extent we can, starting to thin out a little bit, step by step, thin out our performance calendar. In some cases, we are combining certain things like the choir and the orchestra and the opera into like one thing rather than one event rather than three separate events, throughout the year. That's not going to be an every year thing, but it's something we're starting to explore. And also having a really honest discussion of possibly revising the number of required ensembles versus optional ensembles. So, those are just two or three things that are already changing, that were changing, but now are accelerating, and will play a part in this coming year and beyond, I think.
And would you say that your thinking at the end of this pandemic might potentially put you in a better place when we get to the next crisis? Unfortunately, I have to break that news to you that we probably will have other crises here. And do you feel like it puts you in a better place?
Oh, sure. We've all learned a lot. I think, thinking back to our for having, we established for ourselves without really putting in on paper. We established, I think, a number of short-term goals last year. Well, we just needed to get through September, and then let's get through the fall play, and now we're like in November. We can see this. We can see the end of the semester coming. So I think we're going to be fine. But after the first major recital, where we had an in-person audience, capped, of course, we felt absolutely euphoric. We felt triumphant that we had really accomplished something. And I think this feeling of success that I know the faculty feels and felt when we closed the books on this past year is going to trickle down into many, many different sorts of initiatives going forward, whatever those initiatives involve. That we have here a wonderful and resourceful group of faculty that a global pandemic did not defeat. So if we have another global pandemic, we have a toolbox now. We're good. We can do it. We know it works and what doesn't. But I think whatever the next challenge is, the next global challenge or national or state challenge is, we have to keep in mind that the student experience comes first. That is our bottom line. Whether as a university you were mandated to shut down all in-person classes and progress with an online learning, or in our case, whether the goal was to bring people back, you had to do so and with the thought in mind that the students had to have a fulfilling, satisfying, meaningful academic experience. And we must ensure that happens, because tuition is going up, fees associated with certain classes are going up, and activities. The students are more and more starting to ask questions about what their money is giving them. That is something we need to keep in mind as leaders, as faculty, as staff. How can we ensure that regardless of what we're confronted with, are we in a position to give our students a great, satisfying year?
That's very good. You're really starting to talk about this as we start closing up this conversation, some of those lessons that you've learned. Now, if you're going to take away from this some of the big lessons that you've learned out of this pandemic, what would you say that they are?
Don't think that you have all the answers yourself. Be humble. I think you need to be humble, regardless of your position. Our strength comes with the input and knowledge and experience of others. We are made better as a school, as an institution, if we are networking. And we need to know, we can't be ashamed to ask, questions of our professional colleagues in the industry. But be humble and respect, respect your profession, respect the industry, respect the people that are engaged in the same kinds of activities that you are in. And because they're having the same sort of questions, they're having the same doubts and anxieties.
That's very good. All great. I'm hearing here some of these ideas that I would probably put in the category of the blinding flash of the obvious. You were talking a little bit earlier about this idea of sort of rethinking that faculty student relationship that kind of demands that kind of programmatically sort of develop around that relationship, and getting to the point in our relationships with students and relationship with the community and everybody, it's sort of that I would call it humble reality. Mm-hmm. Is that what my father would tell me a lot, is that none of us are as smart as all of us, and none of us are better than any of us. And so really we can get more work together, more things done together than we can separately. And again, I'm very encouraged also another piece that you brought out that seems to be one of those common pearls that we find in leadership is that valuing a lot of voices, that inclusivity, and not just getting so arrogant about your particular symmetric approach to the problem, but understanding that there are other voices that are valued. And then the one that I'm really going to take away from this is that pretty much, we're all people. We really don't have a lot of choice there. We're all people, and we all kind of live under the same kinds of pressures and stress, and all have to figure out our own way to deal with that, whether we're in leadership or we're a student or staff or faculty or governance or whatever. And that really is a good, I think, a good perspective to have as you move into any of those relationships.
Yeah, true. And I think one of the other things that came out with this is that, as an administrator, you have to be not only humble, but respectful of your colleagues and how they might be feeling towards a crisis like this. Every one of us has our own ways of coping. And so you have to have that in mind. You have to, be respectful of them and everyone for this kind of thing, because your faculty will not be truly productive if they don't think you care about them as individuals. Not just as academic colleagues, but as individuals. And crises like this expose those kinds of differences. It forms a potential wedge. And so we have to be here for each other. Exactly. And not jump to conclusions, not assume that because this seems to be working at this point that you need to get with the program. No, there are. So we need to be flexible, respectful, and humble.
And I'll say that my take out of that is that I see you operating in as one of those vicarious sort of balances that leaders face all the time. You can be a leader or you can be a boss, and they're not the same thing.
No,
they're not the same thing at all. This has really been great, Dr. Boulton. Do you have any final remarks that you'd like to kind of throw into the mix here before we end up today?
Only that it feels so good right now. The Northern State University is now mask optional. I know many of my colleagues, if not all of them, are fully vaccinated, and we are just kind of rejoicing in the fact that we can be in each other's company and see each other's smiles once again, and stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, indoors or outdoors. It doesn't really matter. So this, it's June 2nd, 2021 feels so much different from June 2nd, 2020. It does feel like so long ago, but it really wasn't.
And I'm sure there are a lot of people that whether they're in fine arts or not, that share that same sentiment. Dr. Boulton, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking time to talk with us today. I expect to hear and see and experience some very fine arts experiences coming out of the university. And thank you again.
Thank you, JR. May I also congratulate you for being a member of the 2021 Distinguished Alumni Class of Northern State University. It was really wonderful getting to meet you in person several weeks ago.
And a distinct honor and a privilege it was. Thank you, sir.
So let's do this again. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you would like more information on leadership in a changing world, look for J.R. Klein's Oxford University Press published books on global business wherever books are sold. J.R. Klein is available for conversations about socially responsible business and inclusive capitalism. If you are interested in contacting us, call JR Global on 01 614 526 9118.